here with Jeremy Harbour, and he is the founder of the Harbour Club as well as the Unity Group. How's it going, Jeremy?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to unpack a lot of this tactical aspects of exiting, buying, and selling. But before we get there, let's talk about your background. How'd you get started?
Yeah, so I'm an entrepreneur. Like by by birth, I think I started like at 7 years old, selling flowers to people walking past the house, and then selling stuff at school. I actually left school at 15 to pursue a business. That was actually a disaster ultimately, but after that, I started a telecoms company. That telecoms company was in the 1990s when telecoms was kind of really rapidly expanding, and then it plateaued, and I guess everybody had a telephone and then a mobile phone. And then it went through a period of consolidation. So actually the only way to grow a telecoms company in the kind of 90s and early noughties was to acquire a competitor. So the whole industry became M&A driven. And as an entrepreneur, I'd never thought about buying a company because I didn't know what I was talking about and I didn't have any money. And then I realized all the people that were trying to buy my company didn't know what they were talking about and didn't have any money. So I figured I should be on the other side of the table. I should be the buyer instead of the seller. And it really just started like that. Yeah, the rest is history. I've done a few deals since then. So
Very cool. Very cool. So I like to kind of start with my favorite question, which is with fellow entrepreneurs, which is mistakes. You already mentioned, the first one was a bit of a failure / learning lesson at the first venture.
Yep.
But what are some mistakes that you've seen people make in the M&A space?
Yeah, so I was told we only had half an hour. So, my first big mistakes were just around taking on too big overheads too soon. And I see that repeated, again and again and again. I mean, in M&A, it's the balance of risk between buyer and seller is the biggest mistake that I see. People get this, it's kind of like falling in love with the house that you've seen, and you get this deal heat that makes you want to do the deal at all costs. And when the person is saying to you, yeah, but I need 200 grand off the table at the beginning and the rest of it I'm happy to defer, what they're really saying is this business with fucking wind behind it is worth 200 grand and I want all of that now and anything else is a bonus. And I think people get sucked into believing the vendor. In sales, there's this expression: buyers are liars. Well, sellers are liars too, and you really have to balance that risk between you. Small businesses are actually very hard to sell. It's not a natural market. It's a willing buyer, willing seller market, and you have to meet in the middle. You have to find a balance that works for both parties. And most of that is around balancing the risk. You can't give them all this money up front for this business if the next day it loses 2 customers or loses 2 staff and the whole thing, falls apart around your ears. If they want to achieve a sale, they're going to have to work with you. It has to be a collaborative process to exit them from the business and to enter you into the business. And I mean, this is true pretty much up to about probably, 5 to 10 million of revenue. That they're, and I know a lot of your guys are in businesses smaller than that because they tend to be, more technology kind of focused, and therefore, even $500,000 a year can be a decent sized SaaS sometimes for profitability. But these businesses, there's not a natural market for them. They're too small to be acquired by private equity or large, acquirers, and that balance of risk, I think, too many people bowl in, borrow money, bet the farm, put the life savings into effectively cashing out an entrepreneur. They just become exit liquidity for someone and take on all the risk themselves. Now, you can fight your way through that, and I've seen this many times where people have over-leveraged into a transaction, and then they spend the next 5 years basically working for the bank. You can survive it, but there's a better way.
Well said. I like that, where you over-leverage and then you just kind of become the payment to the bank. I think that's
exactly.
It's not discussed enough. It's not really talked about enough. And the entrepreneur, and I know that you would resonate with this, in the heat of the moment, in the heat of the deal, you're really looking for things that are what you bring to the table. When you see a deal that you like, you think you have relationships that you could use to really grow the business, it's just sort of inherently in our nature
Yeah,
to say like, yeah.
we're glass half full people. You know, it's the nature. I mean, we make stupid decisions because we think we can do everything. And
Yeah.
just need to, just need to temper that enthusiasm when it comes to actually. I mean, look, the biggest advantage I had in M&A was I had no money, and if you have no money, people can't take it off you. You know, necessity is the mother of invention. If you don't have the money, you have to figure out a different way of putting the transaction together, and then that just naturally becomes more capital efficient because there wasn't another choice. And yeah, so you know, the facetious answer to how do you buy a business with no money is easy. You start with no money. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Step one. Step one.
Step one, start with no money.
So it's a good segue into preparing. So a very important question that a lot of people tune in for is how to prepare. So somebody that's listening to this, they're operating a business, let's say, they're in the trenches day to day. How can they start to prepare for exiting?
For exit, yeah, this is a really good question. And it's not all the things you think it is. So I think everybody thinks it's about making the business look as pretty as possible in terms of profit and revenue and things like that. Actually, what people want is a business they can take over that doesn't rely on you anymore. So it's systems and processes that drive outcomes on a predictable basis. So they want something that just works, and generates revenue. Regardless of your personal input. So, I mean, the first thing is to create a data room for the business. Now, you can Google due diligence checklist. There's a million of them that will come up. That's a framework that you can use for a data room because all of those questions basically become a folder that you can populate. It's a data room sounds glamorous. It's a Dropbox or a Google Docs that's got all these things in there. And then just think about all the things that the business does that it relies on you to do, and figure out how it's going to do those things without you there. And the other thing that's really important is the thinking of it from the buyer's perspective, because everybody thinks about what they want in a transaction. I want $1 million. I want this. I want that. I want it all up front. All of those kind of things. But actually, I always say you need to be customer focused, and your best customer is the person who buys your business from you. So switch that around, put your feet in their shoes and think about what you would want if you were doing this acquisition, and then try and give it to them, because ultimately any deal has to feel like a win-win. It has to feel like it's a no-brainer for them and a no-brainer for you. And if it doesn't feel like that, you just end up in one of those punishing negotiations where everybody loses and it's not very pleasant, and so the deal doesn't go ahead. Yeah, try and think about it from, think about your best customer, think about the person that's buying your business. What's interesting is there's a load of things you're probably planning to do in your business right now that really don't matter to your best customer. That redesigning of the website, fuck that. They're probably going to give it a new name and change all your branding anyway. All these little things that you think are important are not at all important to it. I mean, I remember I bought this company years ago, and I bought it with a couple of business partners who were in my community, in the Harbour Club community. And they were really excited, just like all entrepreneurs get, about this new thing that we've got. And so they produced this 30-point plan of things they wanted to do in the business. And so just as a learning exercise, I invited the CEO of the world's largest business broker to come to lunch with them. And I presented the 30-point plan. And I said, could you go through this and tell us which of these things will accelerate the sale or allow us to get a higher valuation? And after about 30 minutes of reading through all of these things, he said, none of them. So there was nothing in that list of things which were all great things to do for the business. But there was nothing in there that would accelerate the sale or increase the value of the sale. And ultimately, they're the two things that make any difference. What he did say is that list is a great thing to show a prospective buyer, where all the opportunities in the business lie. But you're better to sell the dream than the actuality. So sell the idea of doing these things. For fuck's sake, don't do them, because you'll be lost in the thing for years, messing around in the operations, stuck in the weeds. You don't mind me swearing, do you?
No, you're fine. You're fine. When it comes to timing,
my kids today, they need to have a license before they can swear. So.
Oh yeah. When it comes to the right time, everybody's different. Every chapter in people's lives are different. Every business is different. But in your experience with all these deals that you've done and you've been part of, when is the right time to sell?
Yeah. So I always tell people the right time to sell is now. And that's controversial because people always point out, what about, Mark Zuckerberg turning down $1 billion from Google? What about, what about? These are the fucking lottery winners. You don't go to lottery winners and ask them how they pick their numbers. These are the very unusual circumstances. Now, I'm not diminishing anybody's ambitions and saying that you can't achieve whatever it is you want to achieve in life. But just bear in mind that when there is a chunk of money on the table available now, in my experience, you should take it, because I've been on the wrong side of this where I had very valuable businesses that no longer exist. I had a call center business that was doing 200 grand a quarter profit. It was my most profitable company in a group of 12 companies I had at the time. And I decided that was the keeper because it had a 3-year contract with the world's largest insurance company. And the world's largest insurance company was AAA rated, pretty much. I mean, it had a better credit rating than most governments. And it was AIG, and they went bust in 2007. I went with them. So I could have sold that business for, a healthy 7 figures. And instead I watched it die. And we had to, there's other lessons, too much client concentration, all that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, even the things that you think are certain in life can turn out not to be certain. Google could do it for free tomorrow. AI could disrupt it. Amazon could get into your business. There's so many things that can change in small business. But once you've sold it, once you've created that capital event, that gives you financial freedom. There's 2 things entrepreneurs never have, and that's time and money. And so if you can be an entrepreneur with time and money, you have a fucking superpower that nobody else has. And, I've seen that superpower being used to get divorced, to get a sports car, become an alcoholic. You can go down this kind of terrible rabbit hole, or you can put it into being, really a force of nature when it comes to entrepreneurship, because you get all your time back when you sell your business, and you've got this capital, and the capital buys you truly passive income. And the truly passive income is what liberates you from having to deal with staff and customers and do the grind, basically.
Yeah. Well said. I like that. When it comes to the actual valuation itself, you touched on it with that list where you sat down with the business broker and he just sort of annihilated the list and said none of those items could increase.
Nobody cares about the color of the carpet.
Yeah. So when it comes to people listening, what are some things that they can do to drive that valuation up if they're coming to the table to potentially sell?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're looking at valuation multiples, so multiples of earnings, then obviously the first thing you can do is to increase the earnings. And there are some paper things you can do to do this. So if you have an accountant, for example, your accountant by default will often choose an accounting treatment that is most tax efficient, not an accounting treatment that represents the most profit possible. So things like, when do you recognize your income and when do you recognize your costs? And actually, by moving around that accounting treatment, you can often have quite an impact on profitability without selling anything else or cutting any headcount or anything like that. So playing around, I call it the financial engineering. It's not the technical definition of financial engineering, but playing around with those kind of financial engineering things can significantly enhance the profit without actually doing much at all in the business. And then the other thing is, if you can reduce the risk of revenue or risk of profit coming in, that will generally increase the multiple. Now, there's a few ways that you can reduce risk. There's things like contracted revenue, so signing customers up to long-term contracts, dealing with a better quality of customer, having more diversification of customers, so you don't have that client concentration that I had in the call center. And then the final driver for value, which is one that people really tend to overlook, is actually scale. The bigger you are, the exponential increase in value. Now, that's partly because of risk reduction. Bigger companies go bust less than smaller ones. There's a bit more resilience to losing those 2 key customers than you would get in a smaller business. But there is also a supply and demand economics to this. There's a fundamental economic principle, which is, if you look at all the companies in the world, it's like a pyramid. You've got a few big ones at the top and millions of small ones at the bottom. And if you look at the universe of people that can buy those companies, it's the exact opposite. It's like this. There's like one guy at the bottom that can buy the million small businesses, and there's thousands of people at the top that can buy the really big ones. So what happens is, as you move up the scale pyramid, you become more rare. There's less companies that look like you. So if you're a million revenue, there's a million companies that look like you. But when you're 10 million revenue, there might only be 100,000 that look like you. And when you're 50 million revenue, there might only be 1,000 that look like you. And you become more and more rare. And at the same time you become more and more rare, there's more and more people that can buy you. So you get an inflection point where there's more buyers than sellers, whereas traditionally there's a lot more. Sorry, you get an inflection point where there's more people trying to buy a smaller number of businesses. And that starts to drive up the multiple exponentially. So when you look at PE firms and what they're paying for companies, I mean, they're looking at enterprise values of 100 million plus, but they're paying crazy valuations and they're competing with each other to outbid each other for these businesses. And then you get down to the bottom end. And I mean, I was talking to somebody yesterday who was buying professional services businesses, highly profitable professional services businesses, and they're buying them for 1 times earnings. And these are generating $1 million or $2 million a year in profit. And I was genuinely surprised. Why are these professional services companies not just closing it down after a year? And it's actually because of the runoff on their professional indemnity insurance. So if they close the business down, they still have to pay the insurance for 6 years because that's the statute of limitations on the professional indemnity. So they prefer to sell it to someone for 1 times earnings with the condition that they keep the insurance going. And then they can retire. And again, they tend to be the principal in this business, so they're heavily involved in the business. So it's interesting that you can pick these smaller businesses up for very, very low cost. And again, risk balanced with the founder, where you're paying them out over time or not putting very much cash at all in at the beginning.
Yeah. Wow, I haven't heard that about the insurance piece. That's really interesting. When it comes to the, like we talked about valuations, we talked about kind of ways that people can drive value through, we'll call it financial engineering with their books. And I totally agree and have been in that exact scenario where some things are more beneficial from like a tax perspective, but they're actually counterproductive when you're trying to exit. So that is really a gold nugget there. When it comes to deal structures, we talked about earnouts. What are some of the more creative, exciting ones that you've been part of that you just enjoyed doing?
Yeah, so obviously, people always ask me this question: what's my business worth? And I always say, well, it depends if you're buying or selling, because it's 2 entirely different approaches, buying a company versus exiting a company. And I think you can be a lot more creative on the way in than on the way out, because on the way out, you basically want money and no other kind of bells or whistles. But on the way in, you can get super creative. So, I mean, most businesses aren't ready to sell. They don't have that data room. They don't have those processes and systems. They're not very well organized. They've still got the nanny or the chauffeur or something that they're running through the through the books, or the holiday home is the office or something like this, So, there is a nice model where you can take an equity stake in the business to do some consultancy to prepare them for sale. And then once you have done that preparation for sale, you put it on the market. Everyone's going to offer them deferred payments, because the first inquiries you always get for a business are 100% vendor finance inquiries, because the real decision makers take a bit longer to think about things. So when they get those first offers of deferred payment, you can then offer the same to match the deal. So basically you say, hey, look, you've had this offer to pay you over 5 years. Why don't you sell it to me and I'll pay you over 5 years? And you know me, you don't know them. I've just delivered all this stuff for you. I'm now a trusted person in this relationship. And so that can be quite a nice way of structuring a deal. Another one that we've done that I think is quite creative is actually issuing a regulated bond. Lots of people have used bonds in M&A for years. And what you normally have to do is sell the bond and then use the cash to buy the business. The problem with that is you're competing against all the other bonds people could buy, like a Tesla bond or a Microsoft bond or whatever. And those companies are obviously much better than yours. So the only way you can get your bonds sold ahead of those other bonds is you have to pay way more interest, which means your cost of capital is expensive, and you have to incentivize the distribution channel to go sell it for you, which means there's a haircut on the amount of money you receive because you have to pay these guys to go and sell it. So you end up with like 70 cents on the dollar, and you have to pay back 100 cents on the dollar with a load of interest attached to it. So it's unless you're selling cocaine or something, it really doesn't mathematically add up in terms of a business model. So what we decided to do instead was to actually issue the bond as a currency. So they give us the business, we give them the bonds. Now these bonds get delivered to their bank account, so it appears in their bank balance every day when they look at it. It pays a coupon, it pays interest, so the interest is arriving in their bank account, could be monthly or quarterly, whatever you set as the bond coupon. Basically, you use this like the currency to purchase it, and then the company itself has a bond buyback program. So every month it takes the surplus cash and it buys back some of the bonds. So they're getting bonds bought back from them all the time, just like they would in vendor finance. But also they've got bonds that they can hold to expiry. They can receive an interest on those bonds while they're waiting. Now, the big advantage with this is if you were trying to sell the bonds to someone else, you might have to pay like double-digit interest rates because you're trying to compete with other bonds. But if you're giving it to a business owner, you're only competing with what else they would do with the money. So they'd probably pay off a mortgage or buy, do something. So it's, like 5 to 6% is kind of the rate instead of like 12 or 13% if you were actually trying to sell the thing. So you get your capital cost much lower. There's no haircut because there's no distribution costs. And you can actually, even with a regulated bond, you can actually issue a lot more bonds than you have profit and revenue because you're going to use the bonds to acquire more revenue. So they're kind of self-financing. So, we had a business that was doing 3 million a year in profit, and we were allowed to issue 50 million in bonds. So you can go and buy quite a lot of companies with 50 million in bonds. So that's kind of like creating your own currency to go and do acquisitions. So wow. That's quite an intro. And we called them extra bonds because we actually listed these on a stock exchange, like a junior stock exchange. So they were tradable as well. And we called them extra bonds because it was exchange traded acquisition bonds. So we kind of coined our own name for them, makes them sound way more normal.
That's awesome. I've never really heard of bonds, and people, the sellers would there'd be an education curve there, right? Like
there's a little bit of an education curve. Again, most lawyers have heard of bonds. It's kind of like vendor finance on steroids in terms of the proposal to them. And of course, they push back. There's a little bit of risk associated with if the bonds don't perform, et cetera, et cetera. But they have the bondholders are the tier one creditor in the balance sheet. So they have there is a charge over all of the business, and in the one that we were doing, obviously we were a business buying another business, so they had a charge over both businesses effectively via the bond. So there is security there, but of course again it really comes down to recognizing the illiquidity of small businesses. Small businesses are not easy, and so you have to come up with these collaborative mechanisms to help people match the buyer and the seller. I think at the beginning of a sales process, everybody thinks it's going to be easy and it'll be done in 3 months and it'll be no problem. And then, after 2 years, they're a bit more amenable to these sorts of transactions. Now, if you flip that around to the other side, when you're selling a business, this is why you have to make sure that the business that you're selling is in the top 1% of the businesses for sale. It has to look amazing from the outside. Everything needs to, any question that they ask, you have to have an answer in the data room ready for them. You have to have a great information memorandum. Everything has to look perfect. Otherwise, you'll miss that opportunity to be the one that sells. Or the other way is to keep acquiring until you move up that scale pyramid high enough that you start getting people approaching you to come and buy the business. So, and typically, depends where you are in the world. I think in the US, it's probably a bit higher. In Europe, sort of 30 million of revenue plus, and you start to get quite a good amount of interest from trade buyers and the like. So it's probably about 50 million over in the US.
So that takes us to the finale. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell Jeremy 10 years ago?
I wouldn't want to spoil the adventure, but look, I would go back maybe 20 years because I've been basically doing the same thing for the last 10 years, which is because we got quite good at it. So we stick to the knitting now. But 20 years ago, I would say build groups. Build groups, create tons of shareholder value through scale. Build groups and do roll-ups. Basically, would be the advice. I think the advantages of scale thing are not only if you're running a business normally. Obviously, I'm talking about the exit value, but if you're running a business normally, there's also a lot of things you can do when you're bigger. There's something I call the scale paradox, which is you have to be big to get big. You can't get the best talent, you can't get the best suppliers, and you can't get the best customers until you're already big. You'll even find like government contracts, they will only give you a contract up to a certain percentage of your current revenue. So it's kind of like artificially keeping you small. And so it creates kind of glass ceilings that are quite hard to break through. Whereas M&A is kind of a cheat code. I really see M&A as the only way you could double a business next month. The only other levers you can play with are sales, marketing, and your team. And they're really operational functions. And I think you need to move to kind of being a shareholder rather than the owner of the business rather than the runner of the business. And it's the next step on the entrepreneurial ladder. So, I would advise my 20 years ago self to just get on with that sooner rather than playing around with all the other shit.
Very good. Very good. One of my favorite conversations I had probably a couple of years ago now on the pod was we talked about concentration risk, and similarly to what you were saying, where you could double a business next month through acquisition. And I remember the conversation, I brought it up saying like, hey, what are your thoughts around concentration risk? And the guest was like, oh, well, you can just solve that through buying another business. Like you literally just completely remove concentration risk through acquiring a similar company. And I had never thought through, solving these sort of traditional issues through acquisition as well.
I would go one step further. There's almost no problem in a business that you can't solve through acquisition. So you can solve bad cash flow by adding more clients from an acquisition. You can solve talent. Finding the right people is really hard because the people that you want are working in other businesses right now. Well, acquire that business and get that talent. It's incredible for talent acquisition. Succession planning. How do you find a CEO to run your business? Well, they're the CEO of another business right now. You acquire that business, you get yourself a new CEO, and you can concentrate on buying businesses. How do you add products? How do you add services? How do you add geographical locations? All of those things, I think the best way to solve them is through M&A. I see businesses invest so much in opening a New York office or so much in developing a new product or service that they literally could have just bought a competitor that has that and they get it overnight.
Yeah. Well said.
Solve the piece in the Middle East with acquisition. That'd be great.
There we go. What are you working on now, and where can people learn more?
Yeah, so look, I think if you're interested in what we're talking about, we have like a 21-day email course around buying and selling businesses that you can get from harbourclubevents.com. You just go to the website and there's a link there you can click on that says free course. So Harbour is spelled the British way, which is Harbour. We stick an extra U in there just to confuse Americans. harbourclubevents.com, or just, follow me on social media. So harbour.jeremy on Instagram, or, find me on LinkedIn or whatever. But, working on right now. So, we have multiple companies that we are taking public. So we have several, IPO direct listing, things that we're doing. We have a really exciting business in the music industry. Their first customer was Elton John. Their second customer was Lady Gaga. They're really smashing it. We have a rail technology business that's doing really well, doing rail safety. It's a telematics business, a technology company that basically stops derailments and other rail accidents. We've got whoever I forget is going to be really mad at me. So there's a legal services group, which is buying law firms and implementing AI to make them more efficient. We've got an alternative funding group that actually specializes in funding legal firms, completely separate business, but in a similar space. Yeah, just a whole bunch of companies that we're taking public. And then when they are public companies, we use those for acquisition. So they become the holdcos to go and execute multiple acquisitions. So it's super busy. It's a busy time.
Very cool. Very cool. Wherever you guys are listening on iTunes or Spotify, the links that Jeremy mentioned will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on, Jeremy.
Really appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.